Hello everyone, good afternoon to all, and I welcome to this Facebook live session. All my friends, students, my esteemed colleagues, and the entire health and physical education community. So friends, I am Dr. Rakesh Tomar. I am working in Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals in Saudi Arabia, and I'm involved in physical education and sports for last 27 years, of which 22 years I'm in direct teaching and research. I have also completed 1 year fellowship in applied nutrition and also 1 year fellowship in sports sciences. So before we begin this presentation, I would like to thank Physical Education Foundation of India and its General Secretary Dr. Piyush Jain, who conceived this idea to come online on Facebook and share with the entire community. So this is Dr. Piyush Jain, and big thanks to Physical Education Foundation of India. And I'd like to also share, most of you must be knowing that yesterday, as informed by Dr. Piyush Jain, that Physical Education Foundation of India has been recognized as a sports promotion body by the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sport Government of India. So this is a big step in the right direction, and I hope we as a professional will contribute more towards it. Yesterday you listened to an eminent speaker, and I would like to thank Dr. A.K. Bansal, who spoke yesterday on coaching, and I compliment him for his wonderful presentation. So before I begin, all my friends, students, everyone who is watching me live here, who is joining live here, I request everyone, please stay home, stay safe, and follow all your guidelines of social distancing. This is very, very important. So today's lecture will be on exercise, nutrition, and immunity. And I'll give a special reference to COVID-19 towards the end of my presentation. I'll divide my presentation into two parts. First, I will talk on exercise and nutrition, and then later half, I will talk on immunity and exercise, and I will give a special reference to COVID-19. My dear friends, I can see most of you are writing some comments, and most of you will write many comments during the course of this presentation or this lecture. So it would be difficult to reply to your comments while I am online. So I will continue to give my lecture, what I have planned for, and later on I will watch all your comments. I will read all your comments and reply to them as soon as possible. So please keep writing your comments, keep writing your questions, whatever questions you have in your mind. Write that, and I will reply to it later in the day. So the movement is the key to life. We know that if you don't move, you cannot live. So, and exercise is what makes a movement. Exercise is for all, irrespective of age and gender. And when there is an exercise, when there is a movement, there is a requirement of nutrition. There is a requirement for nourishment of exercising muscles. And with the right combination of nutrition and exercise, you can improve your immunity. So it can affect your immunity also. So right combination of exercise and nutrition will definitely have a positive effect on your immunity. So when you exercise, basically you need calories, you need energy. And everyone, irrespective of your level, your status, whether you are elite athlete or you are just a health lover or you are just a fitness freak, everyone needs right amount of nutrition. You should have a proper knowledge of all the nutrients and the the quality of nutrients you are taking. So while I am giving my lecture, first of all, I will not touch the supplements here, and I will not promote any supplements because there is always a commercial angle to all supplements and diet plan. So I am not a person who is a big lover of supplement and so-called diet plans. So you will see there are so many different types of diet plans, so many different types of supplements in the fitness industry. Even you must have heard, it's a very trend nowadays, a keto diet. So for every plan, for everything, there is a pros and cons. And what I follow, what I promote is anything which can be sustained, anything which can be continued for a long time. If you start some program, if you start some activity, or if you start some diet plan, whatever you call it, it should be sustainable. Means you should be able to continue it for long time, or I would say you should be able to incorporate that program, that plan into your lifestyle for entire life. Then only that program is successful and helpful, and it will benefit you. So any program, if you do a program for 12 weeks, if you do a program for 16 weeks, if you take a diet plan for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, it's not. How can you have something for 12 weeks? The life is not for 12 weeks. So you should have a plan, you should have a rather have approach which can continue for your entire life. So you have to change your behavior. So there has to be behavior modification. There has to be a lifestyle modification. And anything which can continue for the whole of life will of course be successful. So when we talk about nutrition, what you should eat, what food you should eat, what food you should not eat, there are so many types of plans available. So many theories are there in the food industry. But I always recommend, it is very important, the first thing is very important, the quality. The quality food is very important. And second, your traditional food. Traditional food is a very, very important role. The place where you live, the geographical area, geographical location where you live, because you are made of certain genes, so your genetics, your ancestors, what your ancestors are eating for last so many years, so many centuries. So you should at least take those traditional foods. It's very, very important. Which food grows in your area. So all these things have a bearing, have effect on your body when you take these nutrients in your food. And I always say, whatever you eat, the taste is very important. Anything you eat has to be tasty. Anything you eat must look good. It's not only about the nutrients, it's not only about carbohydrate, proteins, and different vitamins and minerals. It's always taste. So always think wisely and eat wisely. Now, let me come to exercise and nutrition. When you exercise, what nutrition you need, what you should eat. It's a very long topic. I don't think I will be able to do justice in this 30 minutes of my presentation. But I will try to touch some important parts of nutrition and exercise. So knowledge of nutrition forms the basis for preparation, performance and recovery phases of intense exercise or training. During a heavy exercise, total energy output may increase 15 to 20 times. So you can understand how important a nutrition is when you exercise. So if an athlete experiences daily fatigue or he is tired, the first thing you should consider is whether he is consuming enough food or not. That's very important. And up to 6 meals, not 3 meals, up to 6 meals may be needed by athlete, including one before each workout. And this all depends upon how much you exercise. Now there are different body energy stores, and this energy is stored in body primarily as a fat in the form of triglycerides, and smaller amount is stored as glycogen and muscle in muscles and liver. Your body can store 350 to 400 grams of glycogen in muscles and an additional 90 to 100 grams of glycogen in liver, and a small amount of 5 grams of glucose in circulating blood. So greater glycogen storage is always associated with greater fluid storage. Here, 1 gram of glycogen results in 3 gram of additional water storage in your body. So this is a very important consideration when we are going for the weight loss programs also. I will come to this later on in my talk. Now, what is the percentage of energy derived from various sources during exercise? Suppose you begin exercise, you begin running, you start some exercise program. From where you get the energy? What are the sources? Of course, the sources are muscle glycogen, blood glucose, free fatty acids, and triglycerides. So it's very important for you to understand that when you begin exercise, at the onset of exercise, most of your energy comes from muscle glycogen, the phosphagen stores, which are in your muscles. The most of the energy in the initial phases of your exercise comes from muscle glycogen, and a very less percentage comes from free fatty acids and triglycerides. So as you continue your exercise, as you increase your duration, you prolong your duration of exercise, there is a shift in the percentage of energy from these sources. So what's the shift? The shift will be more towards free fatty acids and more towards triglycerides. So when you continue exercise for long term, say for more than 30 minutes or 40 minutes, then more energy will come from free fatty acids and more energy will come from triglycerides as glycogen. So the point here is that, for example, if you are planning to reduce a weight, or if you are planning to burn fat, or you are in a fat loss program, or you are dealing with a client to whom you are giving a fat loss program, you have to understand that the exercise program has to be prolonged. It has to be at least more than 40 minutes duration. Only after 40 minutes of exercise or running, most of the energy will come from the fat. Otherwise, if you have a short duration of exercise, say for example you train only for 25 to 30 minutes, and that too very vigorous and high intensity exercise, so most of your energy will come from your muscle glycogen stores, and which can be depleted again next day. So you are not burning your fat. So if you want to burn fat, you have to increase exercise for longer duration. And as you keep on increasing your exercise, let's say for example you after 3 hours that comes from muscle glycogen. Why? Because the muscle glycogen stores are depleted, and that's what happens when you are running a marathon. That's where you hit the wall. The concept is hitting the wall when all the muscle glycogen stores are depleted from your muscles and your performance is reduced, and that's where the role of carbohydrate loading comes. You must have heard about carbohydrate loading. All the marathon runners, all those who are involved in running event which is more than 90 minutes of duration, you need to load carbohydrates at least 4 to 5 days before your scheduled date of events, so that you can have the maximum amount of glycogen available for you to continue your run. So this is very important, which you should keep in mind when you are thinking about from which source you want to take energy, whether muscle glycogen or free fatty acids or triglycerides. Now the calorie requirements. The amount of energy needed for an activity depends upon body size and body composition. Of course, also the duration, intensity, and frequency of your activity. A small person may need only 1800 calories to sustain normal daily activities without losing a weight. And while a large muscular man, he may require at least 4000 calories. So for a casual exerciser, somebody who is just doing a casual exercise, his energy expenditure may increase by just 100 calories per day. How for an endurance athlete, anybody who is involved in endurance, it may increase by 2000 to 3000 calories per day. Even some athletes, you will be surprised to know, some athletes may need as much as 6000 calories or more to maintain their body weight while training. So it all depends upon your energy. So in general, more intense the activity, more energy it requires. For example, if you are riding a bicycle, which involves less work than running the same distance, therefore it requires less energy. Similarly, more the time exercising requires. Like for example, if you again ride a bicycle for 60 minutes, it requires 6 times the energy needed to ride a bicycle for just 10 minutes. Now there are some important points again which you should keep in mind. Greater the volume of food and liquid, greater should be the number of meals. Just by simply increasing the amount of food consumed in each meal will create problems. So if you are if you are planning to eat more food, you should increase the number of meals. You should not consume more food at a time in each meal, because when you take too much food meal, you will create strain on your stomach, you will create extra strain on your intestine, and also you will not be able to digest food properly, and you will not be able to absorb the required nutrients completely from the food which you have taken. So it is important to increase the number of meals if you are planning to have more volume of food and liquids. Again, the timing of food intake is important. No solid food should be taken in 90 minutes of physical activity. And this period can be longer if the food is high in protein or fat, because protein and fat takes longer time to digest and to pass through your stomach and intestine. Now, while you are doing an activity or exercise, you should take sports drink which contains sodium and carbohydrate, so that you can maintain your blood volume and you can also maintain your blood sugar levels while you are exercising. Athletes should avoid foods with a high level of fiber immediately before and during physical activity. This is again important. Don't take too much fiber, before a physical activity. So after you finish your exercise or your activity, athletes should consume foods and liquids to restore muscle glycogen and hydration state. Now, when you are taking a liquid, gulps are always better than sips. Remember guys, gulps are better than, because sip does not exit the stomach that quickly as compared to the gulps. So keep in mind when you are taking a liquid before or during your physical activity. Now let's come to these three important nutrients like carbohydrates and proteins. So first I will discuss about carbohydrates. Requirement for carbohydrates. Athletes should be encouraged to have higher percentage of carbohydrates, around 60%. They can, but for a normal 2000 calorie diet, this is equal to like 300 gram of carbohydrate. So if you are taking a 2000 calorie diet, you should at least take 300 gram of carbohydrate. Or we can say that the requirement for a normal person is 4.3 grams of carbohydrate per kg of his body weight. So if you are a 70 kg adult, you need around 300 gram of carbohydrate. Now, for the people who are engaged in aerobic training or you are involved in endurance activities which can last for more than 60 minutes duration, then you may need more carbohydrate. So your requirement will be then around 6 to 7 gram of carbohydrate per kg of your body weight. So when the exercise duration is even more than that, like several hours per day, then carbohydrate intake may even increase to 10 gram per kg of your body weight. So it all depends upon the duration and intensity of your exercise. Now, carbohydrate and athletic performance, how it can affect your performance. As you know, carbohydrates are stored in body as glycogen, like mainly in the muscles and in the liver. So during the activity, when you do exercise, body relies on this stored glycogen to be used by the muscles and brain for energy. So carbohydrate comes from, or energy comes from stored glycogen from the muscles. Now, body's limited glycogen stores can be depleted in a single bout of exercise. So you have to understand that you are doing a or a tough single of exercise, your entire glycogen stores can be depleted. So therefore, it is very important that your daily intake of carbohydrate is maintained. They meet the recommended guidelines so that you can restore these depleted glycogen stores. So if muscle and liver glycogen stores become depleted during exercise, what will happen? When you exercise and there is no glycogen, no muscle left in your liver and muscle. So there is a concept called, which is known as hitting the wall. Means there is no fuel left for the muscles to perform actions, and that's called hitting the wall. And this hitting the wall is experienced mostly by the marathon runners. And as most of you know that in recent years I am involved in running marathons, 42 kilometers. So I have experienced myself this hitting the wall. So generally you hit the wall somewhere between 30 to 35 kilometers. So this range can be different for different people according to their levels. Somebody will hit the wall at 35, somebody will hit the wall at 31, and somebody can even hit the wall at 27 and 28 kilometers. So what happens, you will observe that when you hit the wall, when there is no muscle glycogen left and no liver glycogen left, so your performance reduced, your speed automatically reduced significantly, and this can result in muscle cramps also. So it's very important. That's why what I said earlier, that if you are planning for any long distance, any endurance events which last for more than 90 minutes, you must do a carbohydrate at least 4 to 5 days before your competition, so that you can prolong this concept of hitting the wall. Now there is significant reasons why athletes should take adequate carbohydrate. As you know that carbohydrates are a fuel source for burn. So if blood glucose and glycogen levels are low, athletes may feel irritated and tired, and they will lack concentration, which could interfere with performance. So it's not only about energy. When there is a depletion of carbohydrate, the athlete's performance, will also be affected. The performing even a very simple task, they will get irritated and tired easily. You should know that carbohydrates also help in fat metabolism. Body requires the presence of carbohydrate in order to utilize fat for energy. Carbohydrates also provide a protein sparing effect. Remember guys, especially those who are going to the gym, this is to all the fitness lovers, all lovers who go to the gym to build muscles. Carbohydrates also provide a protein sparing effect, so which will help athletes to maintain muscle mass. What does it mean? It means that if you are short of carbohydrate in your diet, then your body will take energy from the proteins, and then these proteins whose main function is to build your muscles for the metabolism of your body, they will not be able to use, for the purpose of building of your muscles. So if you want whatever protein you have taken to be used by your muscles for the purpose of development, you should have enough carbohydrate in your diet or in your food. So it's very, very important, whether you are doing a strength training or whether you are doing an endurance training, carbohydrate plays equal role. So as I told just before, brain requires constant amount of carbohydrate. So when the glycogen stores are depleted, when these glycogen stores are depleted, body will turn to protein, which will come from the muscle tissue to make carbohydrate. So this is important. If you are going to a gym, you are planning for your, your muscle building, you must carbohydrates so that the available protein can be used for the development of your muscles and other systems. So by consuming a diet with adequate carbohydrate, the body will be less likely to make carbohydrate at the expense of muscle tissue. So this is about carbohydrate. Now let's come to the protein and requirement of protein. As we know that protein is so essential to maintain your muscle mass and strength. And protein is something which is very, very, fascinating for all the health lovers and especially the gym lovers and those who are involved in strength training. Non-athletes, so how much protein you require actually? The non-athletes need 0.8 gram per kg of body weight. So if you are, say, 70 kg, your weight is 70 kilo, you need 56 gram of protein every day. So this protein recommendation remains adequate for most active individuals. Now the competitive athletes who are involved in competitions, who are participating in endurance and strength, may require more proteins. Even in endurance events such as marathons. Now again, you see, all nutrients are important. As I said, if you are involved in strength, you still require a good quantity of carbohydrate. In the similar way, if you are involved in an endurance event such as marathons, protein is needed for energy and to maintain blood glucose. So these athletes, these marathon runners may need around 1.2 to 1.4 gram of protein per kg of body weight. So if you are involved in any endurance and strength training, you require 1.2 to 1.4 gram of protein per kg of your body weight. Now strength and power athletes, they need little more protein. So you require around 1.4 to 1.6 gram of protein per kg of body weight. So in fact, the protein intake for most athletes often exceeds the protein requirement and usually to 3 times the recommended protein. So if you are taking a balanced diet, you will normally take enough proteins which is required as recommended, for the level of your activity. So let me give you some examples. Like for example, if somebody is 85 kilo, so he will consume 30,000 calories, which means 18% of these calories, should come from protein. So his protein requirement will be 135 grams. So somebody who is 85 kilo and he's burning 3,000 calories every day, he needs 135 grams of protein. So which means he requires around 1.6 grams of protein per kg of your body weight. So any athlete who is not on a low calorie diet if you are not on a low calorie diet, you are taking your normal recommended balanced diet, you can easily meet the protein requirement by eating a variety of foods. To illustrate this, to further explain it to you, let me give two examples. First example is of like a endurance athlete who is say 57 kilo. So he can consume 68. So his requirement for protein will be 68 gram. That is 1.2 into 57, which is 68 gram protein. So he can get 8 gram of protein by consuming 85 gram of say chicken. For example, he can take 85 gram of meat and 2 glasses of milk in his. So those who are vegetarians, you can consume the equivalent of the non-vegetarian sources. So by just taking these three sources, you can easily meet the requirement of protein. This is for an endurance athlete. Now if somebody is looking for a strength training, you want to increase your muscle mass through strength training, so how much protein he needs and what he should eat. Like for example, if you are say 77 kilo or 80 kilo person, so then your requirement of protein will be around 125 gram, which is 77 into 1.6. So you need 125 gram of protein every day. So for that, what you can do is, you can, for example, half cup of some beans, cooked beans, and 170 gram of fish, and 3 glasses of milk. And for those who are vegetarian, you can take the equivalent of this. So this will fulfill your requirement of protein very easily. And remember one thing here, for both of these athletes, the endurance runner and the trainer, their calculations do not even include protein already present in the grains, cereals, and etc. So what I want to say here is that it's very clear that by simply meeting calorie requirement, remember guys, those who are especially going to the gym and those who are involved in strength training, I know some of you agree with me because this nutrition is such a wide and diverse area. There are so many theories, there are so many people who advised and recommend so many different types of diets, but still it's very clear that simply meeting your calorie requirement, many athletes consume much more protein than is required. There are hundreds of protein supplements that are commercially available. Although in certain types of exercise there is an increased requirement of protein, I can understand. But protein provided by these expensive supplements will not necessarily meet your requirement any better than the protein which is found in your balanced diet. So if you take my recommendation, you don't need any protein supplements. If you take the balanced diet, there is enough protein available in your natural diet. You don't have to take any protein unless you want shortcuts. Some looking for a shortcuts, you are looking for a very short-term goals, and you are looking for unethical means to improve your performance. Then this question is not valid. So you have to give time to improve your performance. So you can use your natural way, natural protein through natural foods, to support your training and support your exercise programs. Now, an important again which most of you are looking for, especially those who are involved in physical education and those who are involved in health and fitness industry, is and weight control. This is very important. How you can maintain your energy balance and how you can control your weight. So as we know that excess calories from fat are more readily stored by body as compared to the carbohydrate and protein. So if you take more fat, the excess calories from this more fat can be stored very easily if you take excess calories comparing to carbohydrate and protein. Now to preserve the lean body mass and enhance fat loss, the weight loss should occur at a rate of 400 to 900 gram per week. Means you should not lose more than 1 kg per week. And this can easily be accomplished by reducing your food intake to 200 to 500 calories per day while maintaining a regular exercise program. So if an athlete needs to gain weight and if you're looking for a weight gain, then you should increase the food intake by 500 to 1000 calories per day in addition to the strength training. In most people, like there is one more very important, when you're looking for weight gains, there is a theory called set point. I don't know if some of you have heard that. It's very interesting. I heard many people asking me question, now I cannot lose my weight. I reach to a stage it's difficult to lose. So what is that? There is a set point theory. So in most of the people, body fat and weight remain constant over long period despite fluctuations in food intake and activity level. And why it happens? Let's come to that. So when energy intake or activity level changes, when your energy intake, what you are eating, and your activity level changes, there is a deviation in both of these things. Body will compensate it to prevent significant changes in your body weight and fat. So first your body will try to preserve and to compensate, by reducing or increasing the expenditure so that your body weight and body fat be maintained. So this is mainly because the body has the ability, your body has the ability to balance energy intake and expenditure at a particular level, and that is called a set point. Now this set point is different for different people. For example, if you take an average of 2500 calories per day, then there will be an average gain of 0.7 kg, just 700 gram of fat each year. So you are gaining 700 gram or 0.7 kg of fat each year, which represents an imbalance of just 5 to 50, means 5000 calories for the whole year. And this translates into a surplus of, you can say, 15 calories per day. So it means if you are taking 15 calories in excess every day, you would be gaining around 700 grams of excess fat in 1 year. So according to the set point theory, there is a control system which is built in every person, and that is a kind of a thermostat for body fat. The set point for body fatness is determined by the genetics, and this set point, that's why I say it's different for different people, because it is determined by genetics. So some individuals have a high setting, others have a low one. In obese person who is overweight, body fat is set at a higher level than in a lean person. So when people lose weight, regardless of whether they are lean or obese, the metabolic signals are generated to decrease the energy output and increase the energy intake in order to return their weight to its set points. So according to this theory, the body fat percentage and body weight are matters of internal controls that are set differently in different people. That's why with the same program, with the same diet, some people lose more weight, some people lose less weight, some people gain more weight, and some people gain less weight. So it is the existence of such a point, such a set point, that makes weight loss a very difficult task, and most people eventually lose all they have lost. So let us come to the next in energy balance. The next is resting metabolic rate, which is again a very important factor, which is also called as RMR. Most of you know what is RMR. So RMR represents a minimum rate of metabolism required to sustain life. It is the energy requirement of a variety of cellular events that are essential to life of an organism. So you can say that RMR accounts for about 60 to 70% of your total daily energy expenditure. So which comes to around 16 to 1900 calories every day. So your RMR is generally somewhere between 16 to 1700 calories per day. And again, it depends, the RMR depends upon your body weight, of course. So you can calculate your RMR. If you want to know what is your estimated RMR, just multiply your body weight into 24 hours. And that will be your RMR. Now, that's what, again, when you're planning for any weight control program, I have seen so many programs available commercially. People say 1200 calorie diet, 1600 calorie diet, 1400 calorie diets. When your RMR is 1600, how can you go for a diet plan of 1200 calories? So there's a deficit of 400, so you will risk your health. So you cannot take, the calories which is required, at least to maintain your normal cellular functions. Now, there are some guidelines which you should follow. I always say that initial goal of your weight loss program should be 10% over a period of 6 months. I advise always to go slow, like 10% over a period of 6 months. A slow loss of 10% of body weight is considered achievable. It can achieve, and when you achieve something, you are motivated. So in such programs, motivation, appreciation, and achievement is very, very important. So when you go for a slow loss of weight, you can get most individuals the larger weight losses. So many people who lose large amount of weight or lose large amount of fat, they eventually regain it. So if you lose the fat or weight rapidly, very quickly, you will eventually regain it. So you should go always slowly. Now, repeated cycles of weight loss and regain, often referred to as weight cycling, and this weight cycling may increase the proportion of body fat. So when you weight cycling, you lose weight, you regain, you lose weight, again you regain. What will happen? So this will increase the proportion of body fat with each successive weight regain. And remember, this will cause a decrease in your RMR. So with this weight cycling, you are going to decrease your RMR, metabolic rate, and your RMR means you are burning less calories, and which makes your subsequent weight losses even more difficult. So to lose 500 gram per week, one must shift energy balance by 500 calories per day. So you should have a deficit of at least 500 calories every day if you are planning to lose half a kilo per week. So please note that this is the predicted average, this energy deficit. So the actual amount of weight loss per week may vary for a period of time. So rather than making dramatic dietary changes, small changes such as reducing portion in your food, cutting back on energy dense snacks makes a big difference in overall energy intake. So don't go for any dramatic dietary changes in your diet. Try to go for changes which can be sustained easily. Cut on the size of the portion you eat at one time, and cut on the energy dense food which has high energy. Now somebody has asked me yesterday one question, that there are foods with high energy but like empty calories. Of course, you have to see that there are many foods, especially many types of drinks, which are very high in energy, but they are nutrient value. So you should not take food which is very high in calorie and they have no nutrient values. So they are basically, empty calorie food. Like for example, all these cold drinks, so-called cold drinks, like Coke, Pepsi, and etc. So they have all empty calories. Means they will give you energy, they will give you calories, but they are no nutrient available. So they are very low on nutrients, and you can say no nutrients in those type of foods. So once the body weight and the new weight is maintained for a few months, a decision can be made whether additional weight loss is required. Now, second thing what you can do is, it is important to realize that people can be physically fit while being overweight. So you can increase physical activity again. So who is physically fit? Somebody who is overweight can be more fit than somebody who is, a normal weight. So the normal blood pressure, healthy blood glucose concentration, and lipid profile are important indicators of physical fitness and good health. So there are many studies which have shown that obese individuals, overweight individuals who are physically fit have fewer health problems than the normal weight individuals who are unfit. So if your weight is normal, if you are having a normal weight, does not mean that you are a fit person and you are a healthy person. Somebody who is overweight can be more fit than somebody who is, average weight person. So parameters of fitness is different. So I suggest 45 to 60 minutes of daily exercise can help. 45 to 60 minutes of daily exercise can help to prevent a normal weight individuals from becoming overweight people from becoming obese, and already obese individuals from worsening their condition. Now, what are the options for reducing energy intake? An ideal weight management program should provide a reduction in energy intake along with education about nutrients, how to increase the energy expenditure, how to change the lives. So it's not just that you are giving him a plan. Education is very important. You have to give him education about the energy intake, education about the nutrition, so that he can incorporate those recommendations, those guidelines into his lifestyle. So as I told in the beginning, if the program's approach cannot be followed for a lifetime, any program, whatever program you are making for your client or you're making for yourself, if that program cannot be followed for a lifetime, then that program is unlikely to promote successful weight management. So please keep in mind, there is no such thing. I am hearing from many people, 16 weeks program, 12 weeks program, 18 weeks program. What is that? What after 12 weeks? What after 16 weeks? There is nothing like 12 weeks program or 12 weeks diets or 16 weeks diet. Your program should be able to be followed by your client or by yourself for a lifetime. Only then that program will be successful. Otherwise, what will happen after 12 weeks? He will stop that program, means he will again come back to his normal routine, and he will again regain whatever weight he has lost. So once the initial weight loss ends, the weight loss slows down. Initially you lose very fast, rapidly your weight. And remember, in most of the cases, about 75% of the initial weight loss, now listen to this, in most cases about 75% of the initial loss comes from the water loss, because as I told you earlier, 1 gram of oxygen is associated with 3 grams of water. So when you lose 1 gram of glycogen from your body, when you exercise, you burn calories, you lose glycogen. So every 1 gram of glycogen, you are losing 3 grams of water. So approximately 75% of your initial weight loss comes from water. It means it can be easily gained later on. So once your ends, your weight slows down because the resting metabolism rate decreases to conserve the energy, and physical activity also decreases because the person often does not have energy to continue their level of physical activity. So low calorie diets are not effective in long term and they have more risk. Remember again, low calorie diets are not effective in long term. So I don't understand this concept of low calorie diet. I never tell anyone, anybody asks me, I always give him a balanced diet. Low calorie diets are not effective in the long term and they have more risk. So when you have a low energy intake, your body protein is broken down and potassium is excreted. Now the depletion of this potassium can result in irregular heartbeats. So remember, there can be consequences of low energy, low calorie diets. Now currently, at present, if you see the trend, one of the biggest controversies in this field, one of the biggest controversies is the role of carbohydrate versus the role of fat in weight loss programs. I'm hearing so many things about the keto diet. Anyways, I will not talk on that because there are many pros and cons about that. But what I will say is that diets that are low in fat and high in carbohydrates are considered the most effective in terms of long-term weight management. Diets that are low in fat and high in carbohydrate are considered most effective in terms of long-term weight management. So weight loss produced by the low carbohydrate diet appears to be short-term and largely attributed to water loss. So as you know, as I told you earlier also, 3 grams of water is stored per gram of glycogen, and that's how you lose most of the weights in the initial stages. A very low carbohydrate intake also forces the liver. Again, remember here, a low carbohydrate diet intake will force the liver to produce much needed glucose, and the source of carbons for this glucose is mostly protein from the tissues such as muscles. So you are using your muscles for the energy. Therefore, such production of glucose will result in loss of lean body mass. So when you get glucose from these sources, there is a loss of lean body mass. And you are not, remember when you are going for a weight loss program, it is not actually a weight loss program. If you see a correct term, this is actually a fat loss program. You don't want to lose your lean body mass. You don't want to lose your muscles. You are targeting to lose your fat. So with such production of glucose will result in loss of lean body mass, and the loss of glycogen stores, loss of lean tissue, and loss of water. A person loses weight very rapidly. So however, when a normal diet is assumed, this weight is always gained. So this is all about nutrition and exercise. I know there can be many more things which we can discuss here, but there is a time limitation. Already I think I have crossed my time to almost 10 minutes. So I may take little more than 60 minutes. So I will now come to exercise and immunity. It may take gentlemen around 15 minutes from here. I hope you will bear with me for this long lecture. Please keep writing your comments. Any questions you have, you can share your questions in the comment box, and I will answer all those questions later in the evening. I'm sure I will do that. So exercise helps decrease your chances of developing heart disease. Now let's come to the exercise immunity, and I will give a reference to the COVID-19 here. We do not know exactly how exercise increases your immunity to certain diseases. Now, exercise and immunity actually is a very controversial, there are some controversies, some contraindications about its effects. Even I have done a 28 months research project on how exercise can affect the immunity, and I found very contradictory results on serum immunoglobulins and white blood cells. I will discuss that later on. So there are several theories actually, but however, none of these theories have been proven. Some of the theories are like when you do a physical activity, it may help flush bacteria of your lungs. Reduce your chance of getting a cold or flu or other illnesses. Flu means like what we are facing now, this infection. Exercise causes change in antibodies and white blood cells. And these white blood cells are body's immune system cells that fight disease. So these WBCs or white blood cells actually fight the infection. But however, no one knows whether these changes help in prevention of infections. There is no concrete evidence for that. There are assumptions, there are theories on this side, there are theories on that side. Now, there is a brief rise in body temperature when you exercise. there is always a rise in your body temperature during and after exercise, which prevent bacteria from growing. Now this temperature rise will help in fighting infection better. This is something similar to what happens when you have a fever. Now exercise slows down the release of stress hormones, and these reduced stress hormones may protect you against illness. So when you exercise, you release the stress hormones, slows down the release of stress hormones, and in turn you can be protected against the illness. Exercise is good for you, but you should not overdo it. Remember again, exercise is good for you, but you should not overdo it. Heavy long-term exercise such as marathon running and intense gym training could actually harm. I will come to that later on to this aspect. Now, people who follow moderate, energetic lifestyles benefit most from an exercise program. Exercise makes you feel healthier and more energetic. It can help you feel better about yourself. So go ahead, guys. Take that aerobic classes, take that Zumba classes, go for that extra walk, and you will feel better and healthier. But there is no strong evidence to prove that taking immune supplements along with exercise lower the chances of illness or infections. Now WBCs, the white blood cells, they are very important, as in your body. So when a foreign virus or bacteria enters into your blood, the WBC destroys that invading particle. So there are several different types of this WBC in your body. Some of them directly destroy the foreign bacteria, while others attack your own cells that are infected by viruses. Now the question here is, what happens when you have elevated white blood cell levels? What will happen when you have a high number of WBCs in your blood? Since you know that WBC fight infection, people generally think that elevated levels are actually beneficial. Since we know that WBC fight infection, so people think that elevated levels of WBC are actually beneficial, but this is not actually correct. So there are some again contraindications in these findings. High WBC count is not a specific disease first in itself, but it can indicate, if your WBC count is high, it can indicate an underlying problem such as infection, stress, inflammation, trauma, allergy, or certain diseases. So that's why whenever there is a high WBC count, it usually requires further investigation, and it has to be always clinically correlated. And many times high WBC count will benefit you, and many times it will not. So whenever there is a high WBC count, it usually requires further investigation, and it has to be clinically correlated. That's a very important thing. Now, what are the causes of this increased white blood cell count in your body? So the causes can be infection, can be smoking, leukemia, immune disorders, and stress. Stress can be emotional or stress can be physical. So this emotional or physical stress can also elevate your WBC counts. But here the good news is that these WBC levels will return to the normal after the stress is gone. Now, how does exercise affect your white blood cell count? If you exercise, WBC count actually increases during exercise. So when you are exercising, I have seen this, in my projects, and there are so many studies which can prove it. But in fact, this increase in WBC count might actually allow your body to identify disease-causing organisms more rapidly than under normal circumstances, and which is a benefit of exercise. But immediately after exercise, when you perform exercise, during and immediately after exercise, your levels of white blood cells increase in proportion to the intensity and duration of workout. If you are doing a very high intensity and long workout, your WBC count will increase in that proportion. Let me tell you here one thing. Runners' WBC level may get 3 times more, means they may triple during a marathon. So when you run a marathon, your WBC count level may triple during the time. So much increase in WBC when you run a marathon. And that's why when you run a marathon, after marathon, for maybe for few hours or few days, you are more susceptible to the infection. Now, what type of food will help you to decrease your elevated white blood cell counts? What you eat has an effect on your WBC. So to keep your levels in check, what you can do is, now this is important since we are in isolation, we are in confinement in our houses. So what you can do is avoid eating foods that are high in fat, avoid high calorie food, high sugar food, and food that is high in salt. Take foods that are high in antioxidants. Take foods that are high in antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E, high in fiber, high in calcium, and monounsaturated fats. Some foods have an effect on lowering inflammation, like for example garlic, grapes, herbs, spices, soya protein, nuts, olive oil, black and green teas. They all can reduce your inflammation. So keep this in your diet plan. Again, omega-3 fatty acids are very important for improving your heart health, and this can elevate the activity of phagocytes, which is another type of WBC. Basically, you can get omega-3, these fatty acids from fish like trout and salmon, and you can also get it in walnuts and flaxseed. Then antioxidants are very important, as I told you, and vitamin C. Vitamin C helps the body to produce more, and all citrus fruits like oranges, lemons, they contain vitamin C. You can also get it from berries, papayas, pineapples, guavas, carrots, broccoli, and cauliflower. Now the next important question comes, does your lung capacity affect viral respiratory infections? So your lung capacity is simply like it's a volume of air that your lungs can hold upon maximum inspiration, that's breathing in. So lung capacity generally increases with age until 35 years, after which it declines in a very gradual manner. Females generally have a smaller lung capacity than males, while taller people have more lung capacity than shorter people. Now, a very common perception is that endurance running improves lung capacity. So we are here talking about whether the running affect lung capacity or not. So this is a very common perception that endurance running improves your lung capacity, but this may not be actually true. Let me explain it to you in a more rational way. Actually, total volume of your lungs is very much decided by genetic factors. You cannot change it. But however, regular running certainly improves other important factors. Running actually enhances the strength of your inspiratory muscles. So when you do running, you do exercise, it enhances the strength of your inspiratory muscles, which allows you to inhale more air into your lungs. So you are able to get more air into your lungs. While this does not increase the size of your lungs, so when you do running, it does not increase the size of your lungs, it makes your lungs more efficient, more active. Further, it promotes the development of important blood vessels within your lungs, the capillaries within your lungs, and this makes your lungs more effective in extracting the air. So this way, yes, running affects your lung capacity. Are runners, somebody who exercises, are more immune to viral respiratory infections? The answer is Yes, runners seems less prone to viral respiratory infections than non-exercisers. Regular moderate aerobic activity reduces inflammation throughout your body. Remember, I'm saying regular moderate aerobic activity. Moderate aerobic activity reduces inflammation throughout your body, more specifically within your respiratory tract. And this is what is involved nowadays in coronavirus, infection. It also helps regulate function of your immune system. So there is a clear evidence to suggest that runners are more immune to receive viral infections like influenza and coronavirus. If you perform extremely high intensity exercise of more than 60 minutes, then opposite may occur. So remember, if you are doing a very extremely high intensity exercise, more than 60 minutes, then opposite may occur. Means this actually increases the secret of stress hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine, both of which increases inflammation. So are runners less likely to develop COVID-19 and pneumonia complications? My question again, are runners less likely to develop COVID-19 and pneumonia complications? Yes, because of the positive adaptations in endurance athletes. They are less likely to have severe complications as compared to others. Further, because of their well-developed lung tissue, they are not impacted as do not exercise. So there is a relative benefit, there is a relative effect you can see. So human system is a very highly integrated network of cells and molecules, which is designed to keep the host free from infection and disease. And exercise is known to have a profound impact on normal functioning of your immune system. So therefore, you can improve your lung function. How can you improve your lung function? And especially when we are in confinement and isolation, what you can do? You can improve your lung function by exercise. Of course, you can improve it by breathing exercises. You can do yoga. Eat lots of fruits and vegetables. Keep your weight in check. Remember, guys, those who are in homes, not doing anything, keep your weight in check. Excessive body fat can make it harder for your thorax to expand in each breath. I will repeat, excessive body fat can make it harder for your thorax to expand in each breath. So this actually impairs your ability to draw air into your lungs, which has an immediate impact on your function. So during this stage of pandemic which is going on, coronavirus, it's very important that you eat well. Okay, eat well when you exercise, and the most important is you should not take stress, because stress will increase, some hormones. It will, and it will affect your immune system, in a negative way, which I will discuss, in next 5 minutes. So the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has raised a lot of questions regarding how exercise can protect us from infection by boosting immunity. And this is becoming more pertinent as many of us have restricted access to the gyms. Many of us, I can say most of us have a restricted access to the gyms where we normally undertake our exercise programs. And there are well-known negative effects of social isolation. There are well-known negative effects of social isolation and confinement on immunity. So this confinement and isolation will or can affect your immunity. So what happens actually? The glucocorticoids such as cortisol are elevated during periods of isolation and confinement. And these cortisols can inhibit many critical functions of our immune system. So when we confine ourselves in isolation, it can affect our immune system in a negative way. So when we are stressed, therefore I say when we are stressed, the ability of our T cells to multiply in response to infectious agent is reduced significantly. And so it is important that our immune cells maintain their ability to redeploy so that they may patrol vulnerable areas in our body to prevent virus from gaining a foothold. And each bout of exercise, whatever you are doing in your home, where you are doing step exercises, you are doing a jumping exercises, you are doing a rope skipping, you are doing any form of exercise, each bout of exercise instantly mobilize literally billions of immune cells, especially those that are capable of recognizing and killing of virus infected cells. So exercise also releases various proteins that can help maintain immunity, and particularly these proteins are muscle derived called cytokines. Now these cytokines can promote the production of new T cells from the thymus, and this will help to maintain the peripheral T cells, NK cells, and all of them are important to increase our resistance to the infection. So when you exercise, you actually increase resistance to your infection. So exercise especially beneficial for older adults. It's very important for our parents also. Exercise is especially beneficial for older adults who are more susceptible to infection in general, and also have been identified as a particularly more vulnerable population during this COVID-19 outbreak. So it's very important that we try to maintain immunity levels recommended guidelines. Now, not only exercise have a positive effect on the cells of the immune system, but it can also counter the negative effects of isolation and stress on various aspects of immunity. Although there is no scientific data regarding effect of exercise on coronavirus, we don't have any scientific data on coronavirus, but there is enough evidence that exercise can protect us from many other viral function infections, including influenza, rhinovirus, and herpes virus. So there is enough evidence for other viruses. While exercise may not prevent us from becoming infected if exposed, it is likely that keeping active will boost our immune system to help minimize the effects of the virus, relieve our symptoms, and expedite our recovery times and lower the likelihood that we can infect others with whom we come into contact. So, despite now, this is I'm just concluding my presentation in next 1 to 2 minutes. Whatever research is available in literature and my own research, which I have conducted for 28 months on immunity, exercise, and when I talk about immunity, I'm talking about WBC and serum immunoglobulins like immunoglobulin A, IgG, IgM, and IgA. So these are the 3 final conclusions which I can just convey to you. Despite the high interpersonal variation between people to people, it is widely accepted that physical exercise may promote changes in the immune system. Second, different studies results indicate that immune system was weakened by long and high intensity exercise, while moderate intensity and short duration exercise strengthen the immune system. Again, I will repeat, the immune system was weakened by long and high intensity exercise, while moderate intensity and short duration exercise strengthen the immune system. This is an indication from different studies. Not all the studies you find in literature, they are contradicting. Nobody is able to arrive to a single conclusion. And the last is high intensity exercises can increase physical fitness. High intensity exercises can increase physical fitness, but moderate intensity exercises, if performed frequently over a long period of time, can enhance immune responses. And before I end, I would like to share, one finding yesterday night when I was preparing for this presentation. I just read, somewhere, that about this COVID-19 in Ireland. There is a research, which indicate that vitamin D, vitamin D supplements can help to fight the coronavirus infection. So this is the latest, research. There's so many research findings you may be hearing, but this is the latest. Maybe some of you might have heard it yesterday. So I read it yesterday when I was searching literature about, this immunity. So vitamin D can help to, boost your immune system. Vitamin D can help you to, strengthen immune system. So vitamin D is, in Ireland especially, they are finding it effective in fighting with the coronavirus. So with this, guys, thank you very much for being me, and it's a pleasure to share whatever I know with you all. I hope you will get benefit. If you are not online with me, you can always access it. You can go through my video, and if you have any comments, you are most welcome to please write all these comments in that box, and I will reply, as and when I time. So thank you very much again. Thank you very much, Physical Education Foundation of India. Thank you, Dr. Piyush Jain, for giving this opportunity, and looking forward for more interaction with you in the future. Thank you very much. Take care of yourself. Stay home. Stay safe. Stay healthy with your family, near ones, and dear ones. Goodbye.